Welcome. Today we're going to look at several examples of how we can calculate the area of a circle and how we can find information to help us calculate the area of a circle. First of all, the important formula that we're going to use for all of these questions is area, or A, equals pi times r squared. R represents the radius of the circle. So let's look at several different examples. Example 1, it says the floor of a new butterfly conservatory will be a circle with an 18-foot radius. So this right here, I know that the radius for this problem, r, will equal 18 feet. The material for the floor will cost $3.95 per square foot. Approximately how much will the floor cost? Now for this problem, we're going to want to use the number 3.14 to approximate pi. So the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what the area of that circle will be. And then, based on that area, we can use that to figure out the cost of the materials. So the formula we will first use to find the area will be pi times radius squared. So we need to substitute in the information. Well, instead of pi, we'll use 3.14, and instead of r for radius, we'll use 18. So when we substitute that in, we get A equals, for area, 3.14 times 18 squared. Now at this point, the variable that we want to solve for is all on its own side of the equation, so we can just follow order of operations to simplify this down. Now we do need to be careful because, according to order of operations, we need to deal with parentheses and exponents first. So that means we need to do 18 squared first, or 18 times 18. If you try multiplying 3.14 times 18 first and then squaring it, you will end up with a wrong answer. So 18 times 18 gives us 324. At this point now we can go ahead and multiply 3.14 times 324, and when you type that into the calculator, you end up getting that the area equals 1,017.36 square feet. So that is the area of the circle. Now that we know the area, we can multiply that area by the price per square foot, which we can see here. It says the price per square foot is $3.95. So we can substitute that information in. We'll have the area, 1,017.36 square feet, times the price per square foot, 3.95. And when we multiply that together in the calculator, we will get that it works out to be $4,018.57. So we can say the floor will cost $4,018.57 for materials. In the next example, there is a spotlight above the center of the floor that covers a lighted area. The radius is 7 feet. So we need to find the area covered by the spotlight. Now for this, instead of using 3.14, we're going to use 22 over 7 in place of pi. So we start out with the formula. We're trying to find the area, so that's what we do not know. So we will start out with A equals pi times r squared. So we can substitute in what we know. We know we're using 22 over 7 in place of pi, and we know instead of r for radius, we're using 7. So 22 over 7 times 7 squared. Well, 7 squared is 49. So at this point, we have 22 over 7 times 49. Well, we can go ahead and simplify before multiplying across. 49 and 7 are both divisible by 7. So we can go ahead and divide those each by 7. So 7 divided by 7 is 1. 49 divided by 7 is 7. So we have 22 times 7 over 1, which ends up giving us 154 square feet. So we can say the spotlight covers 154 feet squared, or square feet. We can also use this formula to work backwards. This example 2, it says an athletic department wants to paint a school's mascot logo on the gym locker room wall. They start by painting a solid blue circle on the wall. What is the maximum diameter of the logo if only 1 quart of blue paint is used? Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about the diameter of the circle, that's talking about going all the way across the circle from one side to the other. So you have to pass through the center. So that whole length down here is the diameter. Well, we don't have a formula that uses diameter, but we can still use the formula for area. Now, in this case, if we look down here, we can see that we're told 1 quart of blue paint covers 78.5 square feet. That tells us the area. The problem says they only want to use 1 quart of blue paint, so that means they can cover 78.5 square feet. So that is going to be the area that we use for this problem. So we can go ahead and set up our formula. So we know we'll have pi, area equals pi times radius squared. We can substitute in, we know for area, we're using 78.5. We're using 3.14 in place of pi. We do not know what r is, or r squared. Well, we can work to get r squared by itself by getting rid of 3.14, and we can easily do that by dividing both sides by 3.14 to cancel out the multiplication that's happening. So once we divide both sides by 3.14, the 3.14s will cancel out, and we're left with 25 equals r squared. Now at this point, we need to find the square root. So what we can do for that, we can go ahead and ask ourselves, what number times itself will give us 25? Or you can also use the square root button on your calculator. Well, it turns out 5 times 5 gives us 25, so the radius is going to be 5. However, at this point, we're not finished yet because the question asks us, what is the maximum diameter of the logo? So we need to take this radius and use that to find the diameter. Well, the radius is the distance from the center to the edge of the circle. The diameter is the distance from one edge to the other edge passing through the center. So it turns out the diameter is equal to the radius plus the radius, or 2 times the radius. So we can take our radius, substitute that in place of r. We'll have the diameter equals 2 times 5, which means the diameter has to be 10, or in this case, 10 feet. So the maximum diameter of the logo will be 10 feet. So that's a pretty large circle that they could paint. We can also work backwards for this next problem here. We're told Ellie needs new grass in the circular pen for her chickens. What is the area of the pen? So if we move this up, we can see that we're using 3.14 in place of pi. We're told how much fencing is used to completely encase or surround this pen. So this is a circle. So since this is the distance around the pen, this is going to be our circumference. So we know the circumference of the circle. We need to first figure out what the radius is. Once we know what the radius is, then we can find the area. So the formula we're going to want to start with for the circumference is circumference equals 2 times pi times the radius. We know what we're using for pi, we know what the circumference is, so we can substitute that in and get 176 for the circumference equals 2 times 3.14 for pi times r. So we can multiply what we can, so 2 times 3.14 will give us 6.28, so we have 176 equals 6.28 r. Since we need to get the variable by itself, we have to get rid of 6.28, so we can easily do that by dividing both sides of the equation to cancel out the multiplication. So when we divide, the 6.28s will cancel, and we're left with the radius equals 28 feet. So now that we know what the radius of this circle is, we know from the center to the edge, that is going to be 28 feet. Well, now we can go ahead and use this to calculate the area. So the area is going to be the formula pi r squared. So we can substitute in, we'll use 3.14 for pi and 28 for r. Again, we need to make sure that we're following order of operation, so we need to do the squaring first. So we have to figure out 28 squared, or 28 times 28. That works out to be 784. So now we can multiply 3.14 times 784, and it works out to be 2,461.76 square feet. So the area of the pen for the chickens will be 2,461.76 square feet. So we are able to take a circumference, work backwards to find the radius, and then use that to calculate the area. This is the most complex type of problem that we'll really be working with, where you use one formula to calculate something you need to use for another formula. On the back, we have a couple more examples of these same types of problems. So let's look at those. All right, so first, we're told how far away can a person live from a radio station and hear its broadcast if the signal covers a circular area of 4,000 square miles. So if we think about it, there's a tower, and it's casting this broadcast out all around it, and it ends up covering a circle. So this 40,000 square miles, that is the area. If we want to know how far away a person can live from this radio tower, the distance that they can live would be the radius of the circle, since that would be the farthest point from that center where the radio tower is. So here we're trying to figure out what the radius is. Well, to do that, we can still use the formula for area, since we know what that formula is. So we can, and for this we will be using 3.14 for pi. So we'll have the area equals pi times r squared. So when we substitute in, we'll put 40,000 in place of a for area. We'll use 3.14 in place of pi. We do not know what the radius is, so we leave that as r squared. Well, to get rid of 3.14 so we can get r by itself, we can divide both sides by 3.14, and when we do, the 3.14s will cancel out. Now, if you're using your calculator, this will end up being a lot easier than if you were trying to do this by hand. So we end up getting that r squared equals 12,739. Now, we need to figure out what number times itself will give us 12,739. I can't think of any off the top of my head, so again, this is where you want to use your calculator. So as a reminder, the way that you can easily use your calculator, if you look over here, you can see where there's this x squared button just above it. In blue is the square root symbol. So we can press second and then this button so that we have our square root symbol up here. And we want to take the square root of 12,739, and we can hit enter, and it will now give us what we end up getting for the square root. So we use the calculator to find the square root of both sides, because the square root of r squared is just r. So we get that the radius is 112.867. So we could round this off a little bit and say a person can live about 113 miles away and still hear the radio signal. Next up, we're asked what circular area is covered by the radio signal if the circumference is 754 miles. So this time they're telling us what the circumference is. So we can use 3.14 for pi. And our formula that we're going to start with is the formula for circumference. So C equals 2 pi r. So we can substitute in what we know. We'll put 754 in place of C. We'll put 3.14 in place of pi. So at this point, we can go ahead and do some multiplication. 2 times 3.14 gives us 6.28. That's still being multiplied to r, and we do need to get the radius by itself, so we can easily get rid of that 6.28 by dividing both sides by 6.28. When we do that, they cancel out, and if we type in the calculator 754 divided by 6.28, we will get approximately or close to 120. It's not going to be a perfect match, and that's okay. But now we know what the radius is, so we can use that to calculate out the area. So we can use the area formula, area equals pi times r squared. We can substitute in, we'll use 3.14 in place of pi, and instead of r, we'll use 120. We do need to make sure to square first, so that we're taking care of the exponents before doing multiplication. So we can go ahead and get 3.14 times 14,400. At this point, we can multiply these together, and we'll get that the area is approximately, or close to, 45,216 square miles. For these last few practice problems, these are questions just like ones that we've already solved today. So try to work through these questions on your own. When you think you've got the answer, then go ahead and record it in the video. So if we look at number 4, it asks, what is the area of a circle with a radius 8 inches? So here we know what the radius is. We just need to find the area. That's the only thing that we are missing. Over here for number 6, what is the area of a circle with a circumference of 25.12 meters? Well, that is the circumference, C. So that means we need to start with the circumference formula, find what the radius is, like what we did up here, and then use that to calculate the area. If we look at the lower two problems, for this, we are told the area is 28.26 square feet. We need to find the radius. So this is just like what we did on the front for question 2, example 2. So we can use the area formula, substitute in this information for the area, and then solve for the radius. For question 7, we're told what the diameter of a pizza is. However, we want to know the area. In order to calculate the area, we need to know the radius. So your first step is going to be to use the diameter to calculate the radius. Once you know what that value is, then you can substitute that into your formula for area to calculate that value. So take this time to work through these questions as best you can. Make sure you start with writing out the formula first, substituting into the formula, and then working on from there. Sometimes you may need to use multiple formulas to help you solve the problem. All of these questions are just like ones that we've already done on this worksheet, so feel free to look at the earlier examples to help you finish this off.